Hello. If you don't know me, my name is Plinkett. I've made my debut on the YouTube channel Red Letter Media. It was run by award-winning filmmakers and actors such as Mike Staclaza, Rich Evans, Jack Picard, Jesse I better not say that word, Tim Higgins, and Josh Davis. My last review was about 3 years ago when I reviewed the Star Trek Picard series. Of course, my heyday was about 12 years ago when good old Mike was wondering how he could make fun of people exactly like him, unknowingly insulting himself in the process. A fat, unimaginative bastard making a character that most represents him. Who would have thought that would happen? Kaiser, who runs this channel, has offered me a chance to make an extra $5 by making a fair review of Star Wars The Phantom Menace. Me, giving the prequels a fair shake. Crazy times we live in, my friends. But enough jibber-jabbering, let's get to the point. Star Wars The Phantom Menace is the most amazing thing since the birth of my son. I mean, how much more could you possibly improve upon the Star Wars universe? And while my son eventually became a Harvard graduate, became an astronaut, and then became President of the United States, I think the greatest part of the prequels is that they will be around forever. If someone who's over the age of like 40 says that their least favorite Star Wars movie in the series was The Phantom Menace because of the CGI, Jar Jar, Jake Lloyd, or any of that other crap, then I suggest you shut the fuck up and shut this review down right now before I explain how much of a retard you are. So where should I start? The Phantom Menace's story makes a lot more sense than a lot of people realized 15 years ago when I made my first review of The Phantom Menace. Despite what I said around that time, George Lucas is a fantastic writer when it came to the story of Anakin Skywalker and his eventual turn to Darth Vader. The fact of the matter is, George Lucas knew what was best for Star Wars since he, made Star Wars, and oversaw the original trilogy even when Kirshner and Marquand were directing his sequels to A New Hope. Despite the narrative that George Lucas was surrounded by yes men and got rid of the people who questioned him creatively, the truth is that George has always had control over his own movies, which include Empire Strikes Back, which many OT purists refer to as the best one. But it isn't. There is another. But that is a great story for another time. I think the best part of The Phantom Menace, as well as Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, is its characters. It seems obvious to those who haven't made a decent movie in their life, but to someone who's been writing, editing, and or directing movies for 30 plus years, making new characters can be a difficult task. In most movies, the audience needs a character to connect with. Now, that may be a subjective gripe, and I would even call that borderline narcissistic, but what do I know? I'm an internet movie reviewer. My opinion means less than the dirty socks I throw in the laundry. Well, the dirty socks my mom throws in the laundry, but you get the point. Anyway, there are many films that have a clear protagonist. And while I made the point in my previous review of The Phantom Menace that nobody knows who the main character is, if you look at the patterns between The Phantom Menace and A New Hope, you'll be able to see that in both movies there are two point-of-view characters that guide the viewer through the story, observing the characters we get introduced to.
This movie is told primarily from the Jedi's point of view, but the story that's being told is essentially the story of Queen Amidala and her plight of having her planet blockaded, as in, say, Episode 4, where the story is told through the eyes of the droids, and this one is told through the eyes of the Jedi. From then on, I very purposely kept Anakin sort of on the sidelines. The Gungan and the boy are always kind of, outside in the hallway somewhere. But that is the way it would be. They wouldn't be included in these kinds of meetings.
It's a storytelling technique George Lucas observed when watching Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress. In that movie, it has the two lowliest characters observing the events of the badass main character.
When I originally wrote the screenplay for this episode, it was very much like it is now, which is that the story starts with Princess Leia and Darth Vader and sets up the premise of the movie, which is their stolen plans to a Death Star. But once we get past that little piece of exposition, we follow the two most insignificant characters, which are the droids. And this was an idea that I was enamored with that was used by Akira Kurosawa in the film Hidden Fortress, where you take the least important characters and you follow their story in amongst this gigantic intergalactic drama that's going on around them that they don't understand.
In Phantom Menace, as well as the other two prequels, there isn't just one main character. There are multiple main characters. And who is one of the main characters in Phantom Menace, you ask? Padme Amidala. Now, when it comes to Padme, her arc takes place over the trilogy. Phantom Menace is just one chapter of that arc. That arc being her ability to lead her people against a force that is trying to oppress them. Her second chapter is her falling in love with an awkward boy she hadn't seen in a decade, and trying but failing to put her duty first over her own personal wants and needs. Her final chapter is realizing the system she was fighting for was corrupted from the inside, and realizing her efforts to maintain democracy were for nothing. Anakin and Obi-Wan's character arcs are the same in that they take place over the course of the trilogy and not just one movie, but we'll get to that soon. Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan's master, is the only main character in the prequels who gets killed in the first movie, similar to how Obi-Wan gets killed by Vader in the Death Star. While he may not have an arc per se, he still ends up working as a vessel for the audience to observe the conflict that's unfolding throughout the movie, just as George intended. Compare that to the sequel trilogy, which has cardboard cutouts on top of cardboard cutouts running around like hookers with their heads cut off. Did I say chickens? I meant hookers. But you might like those characters, you know, if you're stupid. Time to talk about the story of the Phantom Menace. It's mind-boggling just how fantastically the story was written. Is fantastically even a word? Who cares? I'm Plinkett. What? Oh God, what's wrong with your face? For starters, the reason why the Phantom Menace is called Phantom Menace is pretty simple. Because Palpatine is starting his rise to political power, and is starting the true corruption of the Galactic Republic, the erosion of democracy. And nobody is able to notice it until it's too late. Aside from that, just like how A New Hope is inspired by the Flash Gordon serials, the title Phantom Menace is about as serial can get as a title. In the 30s, you'll be hard-pressed not to find a serial that didn't have Phantom or Menace in its title or subtitle. Anyway, the story starts with two pilots escorting two Jedi mugs to a starship under the control of the villain in the movie, Gunray, an ambassador for the Trade Federation. As it says in the opening crawl, the Trade Federation, they've blockaded the planet. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were sent to negotiate with them. They wait for Gunray to start his negotiations, unaware that he is in contact with a cloaked figure named Lord Sidious, who we can tell right away he looks almost like the Emperor we see in the original trilogy. Gunray is advised to kill the Jedi, which he tries to do using toxic gas, sending droids to clean up the mess afterwards. The Jedi hold their breath and emerge from the room, taking down the droids, and then fight and sneak their way off the ship, though the way they initially escape is a bit unorthodox to say the least. This is one complaint I'll definitely concede to, and it's that George Lucas probably should not have introduced Force running. But hey, at least it wasn't Force healing. They land on the planet Naboo, find a local named Jar Jar, who leads the two Jedi to his underwater city in an effort to inform his people they and the Naboo are being invaded. They're told to fuck off, so they go to Queen Amidala's palace to save her and bring her to Coruscant. They manage to escape the blockade, which I do admit is another flaw in the film. I think there, at the very least, should have been some droid starfighters to be sent after them before they got away. Or maybe they should have sent more ships as decoys, but whatever. After barely escaping with their lives, they find their hyperdrive is leaking and have to land on a familiar planet, Tatooine, where we meet Anakin Skywalker, a young, Force-sensitive slave boy who is willing to help them buy another hyperdrive by winning a pod race for money. Meanwhile, Lord Sidious sends Darth Maul to track down and capture Queen Amidala by any means necessary. Qui-Gon makes a deal with Anakin's owner, Watto, to give him the hyperdrive and Anakin's freedom in exchange for winning the race. Anakin wins, Watto is left broke from his greed, and Qui-Gon and company prepare to go back to Coruscant. However, Darth Maul finds Qui-Gon and Anakin and ambush the two, both of them escaping in the nick of time. After a while, they arrive on Coruscant, where it's revealed the Senate, as bogged down as it is, won't be able to help them. What's worse is that the Jedi Council refused to train Anakin because while his midichlorian count is high, they fear Anakin would let the fear of losing his mother get the best of him. So he's turned away, which I find is a pretty good opportunity to talk about midichlorians. Now, midichlorians is not the Force, like people try to make it out to be. As Qui-Gon says in the movie, they are microscopic organisms in your body. You know, like mitochondria, how it's the powerhouse for the cell.
What are midichlorians?
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
I don't understand.
But of course, people don't really get that because, they tend not to pay attention to the prequels, when scenes they don't like are turned on, and so they just kind of, lose their train of thought and talk about patrols. Oh, sorry, what was I talking about? Oh, right, yeah, the Phantom Menace. Queen Amidala resolves to go back to Naboo and enlist the help of the Gungans by settling their differences. They make a plan to destroy the droid army, draw out Darth Maul, and capture Nute Gunray to stop the invasion. As they put their plan in motion, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan confront Maul, and thus starts one of the best lightsaber duels in history, outside of another lightsaber duel, which I'll cover eventually. Maul gets the better of Qui-Gon, the Gungans fail to destroy the droid army before they're overrun, and Amidala is captured. Which leads everything up to our new protagonist in the story, Anakin Skywalker, to destroy the droid battleship, which is the one that controls the battle droid sent to kill the Gungans. Anakin succeeds in destroying the ship, albeit accidentally. The droids shut down. Amidala outsmarts Nute Gunray and captures him, which now leaves Obi-Wan to avenge his master, and eventually he gets the better of Maul and slices him in half, leaving him to fall down the obligatory bottomless pit. Obi-Wan grieves for his master and aims to take on Anakin's training to be a Jedi. Meanwhile, Palpatine's underlying plan to take over the Senate works swimmingly, and it is revealed to the audience that the Jedi know Maul was just one of two Sith. They ponder who the second Sith would be, unaware that Maul's master is hiding among them. So yeah, pretty interesting story when you aren't just finding shit to complain about. With that being said, I'll have to address a few other things. Number 1, the acting. Number 2, the dialogue. Number 3, CGI. The acting, despite the popular beliefs regarding the prequels, was not as bad as people said it was. The way these characters acted in the movie was a stylistic choice made to convey the more regal time in the galaxy.
Before the dark times, before the Empire.
The dialogue was made to fit this choice as well. The dialogue isn't exactly the best in the world in The Phantom Menace, or in the prequels for that matter. But you know what other trilogy has clunky dialogue? And no, it's not just the sequel trilogy.
We'll be sent to the spice mines of Kessel or smashed into who knows what.
If this is a consular ship, where is the ambassador?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
I want to come with you to Alderaan. There's nothing for me here now.
He doesn't like you.
I'm sorry.
I don't like you either.
I sense something. A presence I've not felt since...
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerve herder.
Who's scruffy looking?
I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, what I thought. Why not?
We would be honored if you would join us.
This deal is getting worse all the time.
I love you.
I know. Who are you?
Someone who loves you.
It's your choice, but I warn you not to underestimate my power.
Somehow. I've always known.
I'm sure Luke wasn't on that thing when it blew.
The dialogue is very deliberately meant to be cheesy and clunky. Star Wars is just one big cheese ball. Cheese. And as for the CGI, Phantom Menace's CGI wasn't the best in some scenes, because after about 20 years, visual effects tend to show their age. But when it came out, the CGI, practical effects, and other visuals were top-notch for the time. Apart from Puppet Yoda, but we don't talk about that. Some of the effects compared to today don't hold up, but compared to other uses for CGI, the prequels as a whole have done a damn good job. Now it's time to talk about the politics, which are very integral to the story of the prequels, and to Phantom Menace especially. There are people who complain that there shouldn't be any politics in the prequels. It's boring and disrupts the story and it's boring. But if you look at the story, you'll realize that the trade route taxation and blockade is what kickstarts the invasion of Naboo, and Palpatine's rise to power. If you don't like the more mature themes being present in a film made for 12-year-olds, I doubt you would like most older Pixar movies that essentially have the same approach. Though not necessarily about politics, it was more so about growing up and having to deal with other adult themes like loss and things like that. The 12-year-old kids would gloss over the political scenes, which last like 2 minutes at most of the entire movie, and go right back to watching Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan cut down some droids. And you don't need the books or any of that crap. You can just watch the movie and see it yourself. The conflict is the primary event that you see, but the consequences of the conflict are secondary and are simply the beginning of an even darker plot. Palpatine uses Queen Amidala's compelled treaty signing to gain power and sympathy. Now I'm gonna go into a bit of detail surrounding George Lucas, because in order to understand the way the prequel trilogy and original trilogy work as a whole, you need to understand how George thinks. Take this quote for example.
And then that with Anakin, kind of duplicating the Luke Skywalker role, but you see the echo of where it all is going to go. And instead of destroying the Death Star, he destroys the ship that controls the robots. Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
The reason George Lucas says this quote, if you look at it in its full context, is that he wanted to make an original story recalling how the events of the original trilogy became possible, while also quoting the movies themselves. For example, I mentioned earlier how Obi-Wan's master Qui-Gon was killed, and how that echoes to how Obi-Wan was killed in A New Hope. But The Phantom Menace also echoes to the assault of the Death Star, and how certain pieces of music have a bit of the Imperial March playing in the background. Even Qui-Gon's death in Funeral Pyre is reminiscent of Return of the Jedi, and the death and funeral pyre of Anakin Skywalker. Little musical motifs reveal Emperor Palpatine's theme, etc. He also referenced many other older movies that if you aren't much of a movie buff, you wouldn't see nor understand. The pod race scene is a reference to Ben-Hur's chariot race in the Grand Prix racing sequence George shot back when he was a cameraman. The ending scene in Phantom Menace pays homage to the fall of the Roman Empire. Little things like that are easy to miss if you don't pay attention. My advice to you is that if you're going to criticize George Lucas for something he did to the prequels or the original trilogy, unaltered or special editions, you probably shouldn't do so by exaggerating or lying. Because if you feel you have to do that to prove a point, you'll be delegitimizing your critique or review. I know I did a lot of that back in the day, but hey, I made a lot of money from Mike's the Closet for doing it. All 50 bucks of it, which I spent on pizza rolls. There are plenty of people back when this movie came out that said Phantom Menace was when the saga started to completely fall apart, not realizing when the saga started to truly fall apart, myself included. And to that I say I was taking the wrong medication. My problem wasn't that I was greedy, fat, and ugly, it's that I had schizophrenia. And I'm greedy, fat, and ugly. But that doesn't excuse the millions and millions of people who bought my crap back in the day. I mean, if I came up with those slanderous, brain-dead lies back then, what does that say about the metric shit ton of people who watched my garbage and still continue to? I'll just keep eating pizza rolls. You have a good day now. Yeah, these pizza rolls are good. I love them. What does I love rape jokes?